I would now like to ask the members of the panel for this discussion on stage. I will introduce them as we go along, yeah, you can come up. Prime Minister Plenković, Prime Minister Orban. We have Vice President Jourova, Annalena Baerbock, Prime Minister Laschet, and Vice President Skinas. Welcome them on stage, please. So let me start by setting the stage a little bit more. I think there are three tensions in the European Union right now. The first tension is the tension between the European approach and the national approach. The second tension is the tension between the open and the closed society. The third tension is the tension between liberal democracy and illiberal democracy. Some like to cluster these three tensions and construct a new dimension of politics, which is we move from the old left-right tension to the question about the European liberal democratic open society versus the national-oriented, closed, and illiberal society. Now, all the actors here on the panel take positions in this discussion. If I had to situate them on this dimension, I would clearly shift them into the more pro-European discussion. But we don't want to simplify. The question which we ask is, can we build a Europe that protects by being these pro-European voices and by fostering European integration? And I would like now to go through the panel, give a very short individual interview situation to each of you, and then we open it up to the panel, and then we open it up to you. You know via the app that you can send questions to me. They're first filtered by teams behind, then I see them, so be careful what you're going to write, and then I will share them with the panel. Let me start with the Prime Minister of Romania, Ludovic Orban. We're delighted you're here today. You are freshly elected. You are a new actor in the European context.
Freshly elected and freshly...
And I was just going to say, and you're facing a situation where snap elections might be looming relatively soon.
We will have soon elections, and this will be decisive.
Well, then
to answer to you, very short, we have to defend our borders, but of course we don't have to keep other borders inside the European Union. Doesn't matter.
Go ahead.
Which kind of borders? Of course, to keep open the European Union, the Western Balkans, to the states promised a partnership, and not only to be passive in what is happening there, but also to support all the democratic forces in these countries, because the situation is very clear. Third, of course, to defend the individual rights, the freedom of citizens in all Europe, even in the countries where the freedom could be affected. And I finish my first intervention to tell you, I cannot imagine an illiberal democracy, because, in my opinion, where is illiberalism is not democracy.
When you talk about this positioning, you take a very different stance than many of your neighboring countries, especially in the East. Now, which perspective do you see for Romania in the next years? There's the question of Schengen. There's the question of the Eurozone. Which kind of message are you going to send to your fellow citizens should the election be upcoming?
Of course, Schengen, of course, Eurozone, of course, to defend the border, because Romania is a country which defends a very long European border, and we do it with success. Our message is very clear, to respect the values, the principle, and the regulation issued at the European level, with the very important presence of each country in the decision-making process.
What is your response to those, especially in the western parts of the European Union, saying Romania is not ready? You fought your election last November aggressively on the corruption discussion. The question about protecting borders is of key importance. Are you ready to join the Eurozone? Are you ready to join Schengen? Which kind of signal do you send to these people asking that question?
We are ready to be integrated in Schengen zone, I'm very sure. And with respect of the technical condition, Romania is a democratic country. Romania is a country very pro-European and a country which showed in the last more than 10 years that is a European actor. And regarding corruption, I have to emphasize that on my point of view, our main objective is to put an end to mechanism of cooperation and verification, not only changing the image, but changing the situation in Romania. And we are strongly devoted to a process of respecting the second article of the European Treaty regarding rule of law, assuring an independence of justice, and practically to help to reduce the corruption, the process which started a long time ago.
Thank you so much. Let me turn to Vice President Jourova and bring you into the discussion. Now, the European Commission is still relatively fresh, but you are an experienced commissioner. You served in the previous commission. One of your key areas of expertise will be to contribute to this conference on the future of Europe. And if that conference was be called, it's obviously because we have those tensions I started out with and which were also just raised. Now, perhaps you could briefly tell us what you see as the prime role of this conference, and then we'll follow up and ask a little bit about this role of democracy, which is at the core of what you're doing. Vice President.
Thank you very much. Good morning. If I look fresh, it's the first good news for me today. Well, yes, the Commission is fresh, is ready to deal with big things. And in fact, to continue what the previous Commission tried to do, because our slogan was to be big on big things. And we have several really big things on our table, and we want to discuss these big things with the people. And we tried to have an open dialogue with the citizens. Remember the White Book on the future of Europe? There was a clear message from the people that they do not want to reduce the EU only for the single market, the single market without the values. And for my current job, this is a very important message. And we would like to use this conference on the future of Europe to work in two strands. One is the strand of work which I am responsible for, which is to look into the European electoral system and to make it more democratic and more transparent. If you remember, the European elections were a good surprise as for the turnout. We had more than 50% of people electing, but we also took the lesson from Brexit, when we heard that European Union is not transparent, democratic, understandable enough. And that's why I am sure that we should look into the way we vote the people for the European institutions who, let's face it, have very big influence on the lives of the EU citizens. The second strand of work will be the debate about big themes, the big things, the things we are debating today, how to be more sovereign and more strong towards the rest of the world, how to manage the digital transformation, how to manage the green transformation, how to uphold the values, which we heard so many strong messages already from Mr. Plenković and Madame Čaputová here. So rule of law, democracy, freedoms. We will discuss about the security. And the conference on the future of Europe, it's a little bit discouraging title. We want to invite the widest possible debate on something which is called conference. So we will have to think about how to do it better. We want to create the digital tool for easy two-way communication with the citizens. We want to involve as much as possible national parliaments to the debate. And all that should be finished by spring 2022 to be ready for either the reform of the electoral system or making only some cosmetic changes. God knows whether we will have courage to open the Lisbon Treaty. It is not sure now. But at the same time, we would like to work responsibly with the answers we receive from the citizens.
I mean, there was a lot of corridor talk here in Munich about this conference, because people ask, what is it going to be? And you have explained it. Now, if I had to react directly, I would say, wow, this is a Herculean task. I mean, bringing in the national parliaments, discussing all these issues in the current context of confrontation. Aren't you afraid that one of two or three risks materializes? One risk is that this is taken over by the Eurosceptics and that they will actually run the show. A second risk could be that you don't deliver. And a third risk could be that at the end you do deliver, but it's not implemented. There was an exercise called the Convention on the Future of Europe a few years ago, which ultimately led to the Lisbon Treaty, but was not considered that big success it was meant to be, that moment of uniting Europe. Aren't you afraid this could go wrong?
This is a big task ahead of us, and I am very much aware, and I'm not alone, who is absolutely convinced that we have to do this right. And I am, maybe surprisingly, not so much afraid of the reaction of Eurosceptics or of abuse of this big idea. Let's talk about Europe with the widest possible audience. Also, I expect this will be the subject of attacks by disinformation and all that we face at this moment, which is also my big topic. So I am not so much afraid of this. I am afraid of, how to say, disappointing the people, that it's just another artificial attempt to show that we listen. We really want to listen. And not only listen, we want to work responsibly and in a transparent manner with the answers. That's why I mentioned before that it has to be two-way communication. And when we opened the presidency in Zagreb, Mr. Prime Minister Plenković said that we live in the era of impatience. People are impatient. They want us to give solutions. And I think that it should be our ambition to involve the people to take part in creating the solutions. Otherwise, it's just a top-down exercise. We cannot afford it. We have to do this right.
Thank you. There is a country at the heart of Europe which was described by its federal president here in Munich at the very opening in the following ways. Federal President Steinmeier said, there should be no rapid heart beating at the center of Europe, referring to Germany. Now we have two German politicians here who are part of this discussion about how Germany could better contribute to European integration. I will start with the opposition politician and then move to someone who belongs to the camp of government but is not yet at federal governmental level. I would like to start with Annalena Baerbock, who's chairperson of the Green Party, together with Robert Habeck since January 2018. She has been a very active member of parliament, taking position on the European Union and on European matters. In very simple terms, Frau Baerbock, what can Germany do differently to help lead this conference for the future of Europe to success and make sure that we get this integration at the core of Europe?
Good morning to everybody. To put it in a nutshell, engage with passion. I found it very important what the President just said in her speech, that rule of law, that democracy that the values Europe stand for, they don't fall from sky and then they are there or they are not there. But we have to fight for them every day as citizens, but also as politicians and as leaders. And I see, and especially saw in the past, that this fight for the values, the fight for passion with courage, wasn't really there. Everybody did this own battle for good sense of reasons, because in different national states we had the populist tensions and everybody was looking, so what do I have to do for my home country to keep it together? But as long as we don't have this common fight for the rule of law on the European level, I think we won't move forward. And in this regard, I think it was important that you mentioned that we had a convention on the future of Europe already, once in time, in a different situation, a very positive situation. We really have to remember what went wrong afterwards. And I think, because you said, I fear what happens to the people, that they are disappointed. I was there as a young student and academic at this convention, taking part in the discussions. And we were on the stage of describing a new constitution for Europe. But what happened then? We forgot that Europe is not in Brussels, big institution. I'm totally passionate about this. But beside this new convention and the debate was a discussion of the new directive of general services. And we had the big debate in France those days about the constitution, about social cohesion. And I truly believe before the Euro crisis, before the refugee question, there was a crisis which we didn't really feel, that people didn't trust anymore, that this, what is important for people, social life in your hometown, in your region, social cohesion, that this wasn't really set up in this constitution. So to bring it back 15 years later to now, if we do this dialogue, we have to make clear that a Europe which connects, a Europe which stands in solidarity, needs a home base for everybody, meaning investment into good schools, in infrastructure, digital, but also mobility infrastructure on the ground. If you want to go outside, you need a same home. And this means now for Germany, because you asked for what can we do as politicians, well, we have to invest in Europe, in the European budget, in this infrastructure, in the future of Europe, securing a safe home with social services on the ground, and then fighting for more common European policy, be it foreign policy or be it common defense policy on the European level. And there we have to invest in solidarity and not just looking at national budget and what does it mean to my hometown.
But let me push you a little bit. When you negotiated the Jamaica coalition, the negotiations eventually collapsed. The chapter on Europe was relatively weak of what was seen afterwards. So it's not that you made this major push. Are you ready next time? I mean, there's a high probability that you will be part of the next government as the Greens. Are you ready to say, look, Germany can go into a deficit, not only to finance the European budget, but also in order to get German infrastructure built up? There's it's not a lot of spillover, but there is spillover to other countries that would actually pull the European growth trajectory upwards. Are you ready to discuss in Germany the issue of migration that is still on the table? Are you ready to really take that pro-European stance? Perhaps you could say a few more specific words about that.
Well, one easy word, yes, definitely. And this is a passion also which have been talked about before. I think we shouldn't be afraid for clear answers. To say, I'm not sure if I would raise the budget, yes or no. I mean, why should people follow if the leaders are not sure where they want to go? Nobody will follow. So yes, we have to take a clear stance there. I mean, we are at an international conference, so I don't want to go into details from coalition talks between conservative liberals, and this was what Mr. Enderlein was mentioning here. Yes, the EU chapter was very weak, and this was a problem. And the consequence, because I can speak only for the German Greens here, for my party was, towards the European election campaign, we go with a total pro-European profile. We campaigned on a higher budget with 1.3% of the GDP, and we didn't go down in the European election. I mean, my colleague can say something towards it, but in many, many towns, in many, many regions, we had the highest score. So I think, yes, we do have to invest, Because the investments, I mean, this is the good thing about the Green Deal, but also the good thing, if we do it right, about connecting Europe. I mean, this is transactional connection. If we talk about grids for electricity, because we need decarbonization, this is not just a German grid. I mean, this is a grid around the Northern Sea. This is a grid between Portugal, Spain, and France, if they are ready. We also have to discuss with them with interconnectors. This is a grid because I live at the German border next to Poland. This is something we do have to do together with Eastern Europe. And this means, again, that I cannot come to a council and say, well, the budget from German perspective is this and that. If I know that my Polish neighbor, they struggle if they do the phase out in coal. So I have to bring something on the table as well, which helps the transformation, like in Poland, like in Czech Republic, or because you asked a question of migration. I have to bring something on the table which helps Italy, which helps Greece in this difficult situation, saying, we know you have the hotspots at the border, and we as European, we have Germans, we have to do something about it.
Let me turn to Prime Minister Laschet, who has been Prime Minister of the largest German region, North Rhine-Westphalia, since 2017. He's CDU party chairman in North Rhine-Westphalia, deputy chairperson of the federal CDU, and as was mentioned earlier on, he was a member of the European Parliament for quite some time. Now, is Annalena Baerbock right in everything she said?
Nearly. She's in some questions right, but the question is, what is the perspective for the European Union after the Brexit? And I will precisely speak in German a bit forward.
We in the EU right now, we're facing a point in time where we've always thought, what else can we solve in a European way? Where else can we generate common ground? That was the approach of the European unification process, and it has been that for years. And now we're at a point where the skepticism among the citizens is larger with every single step of integration. But the need for that is much bigger than any time before. In a bipolar world, bipolar between China and the US, Europe will only play a role if we overcome our nation-state thinking and come to a common European solution. But the question is this: how do you tackle an increasingly skeptical population if the need for more Europe is on the agenda? And I think there are many topics, and that's why I agree, there are topics that Annalena Baerbock mentioned that you can use to explain that. So talking about internal or domestic security, it is just an absurd idea that the 27 member states alone fight international terrorism, human trafficking, drug trafficking with their national means. They can't solve that. And in Germany, we have 16 federal states on top of that trying to tackle it individually. No, you need more Europe here, because that can contribute to more security for the citizens. If you explain it that way, the citizens will tell you, oh, that's right, climate is the next very obvious topic. The climate does not stop at your national border. Climate change doesn't stop there. You need to have to find a common solution, and Europe is even too small for that. And this is why we have the Paris Agreement, which has an international scope. Then look at foreign policy. Here we do need more, or maybe differently, we need less unanimity, but we need foreign policy that is more able to act, especially if we want to react to what is happening in the Middle East. And if we disagree on our thinking and approach to the United States, if that ever were to happen, it could happen. For example, when it comes to the nuclear agreement with Iran, or when it comes to how do we approach protectionism and free global trade? Europe will only be taken seriously if it speaks with one voice here and if it's capable to define its own interests. Yes to NATO, but if NATO does not want to or cannot act, we need our own European response. And so I think a lot of people would follow us in this kind of thinking if we tell them we need more research, more AI, more protection of our external borders. And if we want that, we will need more funding for that. It will cost money. And in our new foresight, Germany, I think, will have to make a larger contribution because the British are going to leave and new tasks are going to be added to the agenda. And Germany is going to expect funding from the EU for its own regions. But that only works if people want that. Do you think that there is a majority for that in your party? Do you assume, once again,
that there is a majority for this kind of position in your own party?
Yes. Ja, wir müssen.
Fully agree.
Also,
yes, of course, there are discussions ongoing in German society and also in the EU and my party. But this basic idea that has been carrying and been the bedrock of my party since Konrad Adenauer, that basic consensus and idea is still there, and we can advertise that and we can implement that. And until now, all the major steps of integration have been coined very much by the Union, by the European Union. In the time of Helmut Kohl, the major initiatives for Europe, in favor of Europe, came from Germany. A common single market, a common currency. Just imagine that. It needed to be explained to the Germans that they have to give up the Deutschmark and create the euro. Imagine, you have to bring up that courage with different topics today. So a common currency, the Schengen area, doing away with the borders, all that happened in the 80s with Helmut Kohl. And then we had Mitterrand and Delors on the French side who supported that. Today, the French president is making proposals, and we need a long time to respond to them. And the coalition agreement, not the Jamaica agreement, but the current agreement, has the title More Dynamism for Europe. And we have seen not so much of that over the past 2 years. And this is why there are still tasks ahead that are linked to the German Council presidency after Brexit. And the task is to generate more momentum here.
President Skinas, let me turn to you. You have that portfolio in the European Commission that sparked some debate in the beginning, this discussion about which areas would really be covered and how they would be connected. Migration, asylum, security, union skills, education, integration. All these areas were meant to represent a Europe that would work. If you look backward and you look forward, where should Europe correct mistakes that were made in the past? Were there mistakes made in the past years? And if yes, how can we correct them?
Good morning. First of all, I feel like a colossus of Rhodes strutting between the two panels, because my job involves both the Europe that protects and the Europe that projects. So maybe I stay for the next panel too, Ambassador Isic. Now, we are here for the Europe that protects side, and looking back, of course, we have to be very clear on things that Europe failed to deliver. On security, we still face fragmentation. There is fragmentation and lack of trust. Of course, in a way, this is easy to explain because the security people are born with an inherent lack of trust. So we have to bridge this lack of trust. We have to try to work together to address physical and digital threats. We have to align the level of protection between the two. We have to prepare our union for these new challenges, namely 5G and artificial intelligence. No one in Europe would like the development of algorithms to be in the hands of the engineers. We want it to be in the hands of politicians and regulators. And of course, the big challenge is to find the right balance on migration policy that combines the two basic pillars of responsibility and solidarity. You asked me what we did wrong last time. I think we were very quick to press with solidarity without making clear that the responsibility element is there. Now, as you know, we're preparing a second go with a new EU Pact for Asylum and Migration that Prime Minister Plenković referred to earlier. This will be a holistic approach, a different approach. We will start with our relations with the countries of origin and transit, where Europe spends a lot of money with development aid, but still fail to address the root causes of migration. Then we have to have a robust management of our external borders. It's unthinkable that we leave our external borders management to our frontline member states. We have to build this capacity through the new European Border and Coast Guard. And finally, we have to come up with a system of burden sharing and solidarity that goes beyond the current situation, which is unfair to the countries of first entry, where they shoulder disproportionate burden on behalf of the Union. I think this is doable. Last time we failed. We have to be very clear with that. I don't want now to open the wounds of what went wrong. I think the main difficulty was that we tried through qualified majority to decide areas that are very much linked to the national sovereignty in the way our governments and societies react to these issues. Now we're preparing the second go. Failure is not an option this time. And I want to be very clear, we will take the landing gear down only if there is a landing zone. So we are now preparing for this landing zone, and we want to make sure that whatever we present will fly. And of course, we hope, and this is probably the last point, that in this debate, we need a certain sense of, how should I put this, calmness and coolness. I think we need to have less populists claiming that there are very easy solutions to these complex problems. We have to work to make this understood, and we have to find le bon milieu, the right approach, the right equilibrium. And I think, well, Minister President Laschet, in his previous life as a member of Internal Affairs, Interior in North Rhine-Westphalia, gave this tonality of the right response to migration, as did, for example, Prime Minister Mitsotakis, who faced a neo-Nazi party that threatened the narrative. So cool, work, and soberness.
Just to reconnect the discussion about the multi-annual financial framework, what you describe in terms of needs to implement your policies is very, very large. So if you think about external border control, if you think about working with third countries, you use the word burden sharing, which is financial on the one hand, which is also who will host migrants in countries. There's a lot of financial needs behind. Do you have expectations for the MFF discussions, and do you think this can be covered for the next 7 years?
As you know, we have an extraordinary European Council next Thursday in Brussels, which is the first attempt to address the MFF quandrum. There, on the migration security front, there is one central priority, which is to implement the decision we collectively took to have a permanent standing corps for the European Border and Coast Guard. This will be the first EU agency with 10,000 permanent staff carrying guns, having EU uniforms, and having their own equipment. This is an unprecedented step in federalizing away our border management. The decision has been taken, and now we need the money. So I really hope that this fundamental element of responsibility will not be lost, will not be the victim of the discussion on the MFF on Thursday, especially because we have the rather oxymoron or antithetic that some of the governments that want us to do better border management are with a frugal front. So we cannot have it both ways. If we need border management, we need the resources to make it happen.
Let me briefly turn back to you, Prime Minister. You gave this speech, you outlined this. Now you've listened to the discussion. Are you happy with that?
With the general debate of my colleagues, very much, yes.
Yeah. Are there members or people in the European Union that you think will disagree with that approach?
Well, I think the whole debate about security and the debate that we have next week, which is the financial framework, and the issue of the burden sharing on the consequences of the migratory crisis are a cocktail which has, I would say, emancipated the divisions among the EU member states. In my view, this is the critical political problem that we have. For the first time, I felt there was really an item on the agenda of the European Council in the last 3 years when this came to a clash. You could see in the debates in the middle of the night that we were sort of grouping and cornering. Sort of they're like clusters of prime ministers trying to understand what the others are going to say and what the response would be. So this crisis has hit, in my view, the natural pro-European reflex of most of the countries. And this is I would say, a structural problem that we need to address today. And this should be, and this is what I said to the College of the Commissioners when they were in Zagreb, when we discussed what the European Conference on the Future of Europe should be about. I think this conference should not substitute or repeat what the institutions are doing anyway. This should be really a pure political debate on what are the issues that where we do acknowledge we have a huge political problem. What are the fractures on the European continent? How can we soften those differences and how can we be more united to have a common response? I think this is the critical problem. This is, in my view, issue number one for Europe in the next couple of years.
I invite you all now to go to your apps, to send questions or to raise your hands if you want to ask questions. I want to go with one sentence to each of you while you're preparing your questions. Actually, two answers, but really in one sentence. One is the current budget of around 1%, I mean, we don't know the exact landing zone, and President Macron yesterday came up with this metaphor saying, you know, we discussed whether it's 1.06 or 1.07. The fact is the bread gets larger and we have the same amount of butter. And even though that metaphor is not entirely correct because the GDP has also been rising and in that sense the overall amount goes up, is 1% GDP the right amount for the spending of the European Union? What do you think? I start with you, Vice President Skinas.
No, it is not. Clearly it is not.
How much should it be?
It should be something that would maintain the level of our common ambitions, adjusting traditional areas like agriculture and cohesion to the societies we live in, but clearly making an additional effort to address the new challenges. And the new challenges is, of course, research, development, innovation, and security.
Herr Ministerpräsident.
I think it is important to define what tasks you decide to tackle, and then you need to define what funds you need. I think the current budget is not sufficient, but I wouldn't want to give you a number at this point because that is a job for the negotiators. But there will be more, I think, that is clear for Germany.
Well, we know the task. We debated them now for months and months. So yes, we need a higher budget. And if you see the task, if you have more responsibilities, we have to rise, I think, at 1.3%. So really make a step forward because Europe cares for more where national budgets are not so much investing anymore. Plus, I think this is very important. We have to look at the own resources of the EU, its own taxes, and we have elements there. And we have to use them there as well, looking especially at the pricing for CO2.
Vice President Jourova.
Yes, I will repeat what Margarita said, that it is not enough because we see that we need to do more with less money, and more means to prioritize with regard of the current needs. And when you have less money, you really have to think twice where you invest. So the principle of value for money will have to be very strong. And one more thing, you didn't ask about that, but the speed is also of the essence here, because if there will be a big delay in adoption of the budget, there will be a gap in cash flow for many, many projects in the EU. And so by having the budget delayed, we will devaluate the money which is invested now. It sounds technical, but it's a very political issue. Thank you.
Oh, yes. Prime Minister.
New objectives means new expenses, and new expenses should be financed through a growing of the percentage if we want to not affect the classical objective of European policy, cohesion, common agricultural policy, convergence, and other objectives. For us, it's necessary of growing. Of course, this should be unanimous accepted.
Prime Minister Plenković?
I think it's not enough. Very simple question. Answer.
It's interesting. We have a very clear agreement here that the 1% is not enough, but I take all the bets you would like to take. It's not going to be above 1.1 at the end of the day, and could even be less than that. Now, there's a very interesting question from Charles Grant, which we have indeed avoided so far. Charles, where are you? In the back. Charles, please ask your question.
None of our illustrious panelists has talked about the problem of the rule of law in many EU countries. Do they agree with the idea that some countries do, that the budget talks, the MFF talks, should reform the structural funds so that receipt of the structural funds is dependent on compliance with the rule of law? Should conditionality with the rule of law be added to the provisions for the structural funds?
That question is so central that I think we should briefly go again through the panel, and you tell me what you think. I start here. Prime Minister Plenković.
I think everybody agrees that the rule of law will be included into the legislative package when it comes to the MFF. We tend to forget that the MFF actually is more than 40 pieces of legislation. And that's why what Commissioner Jourova said, we should not be too late on reaching an agreement at the level of the heads of state and government, since there is the whole procedure that needs to be negotiated through trialogues between the Council, Parliament, and the Commission. On the rule of law, I think, first of all, I've mentioned it in my opening speech, but what we here need to be very clear. The essence is that we really understand what we will agree upon. The key concern among some of the member states is that there is no vague or loose formulation which then ex post leaves a lot of arbitrary space for saying someone has violated a certain aspect of the rule of law and thus no funds available. This is the heart of the debate which we will face. So we need to be very, very precise, no imprecision. Otherwise, everybody's in favor.
I hear a lot of nodding. Perhaps if you could also address whether it's feasible. I mean, we need a unanimous agreement. This is an institute, or will be an interinstitutional agreement. Prime Minister?
I hope will be feasible because if we don't regulate very clear, the situations could appear very many subjective decisions which could create unjust penalties for different countries, possible from other reasons than not respecting the rule of law. It's a very delicate question because here should be very clear the regulation, and is a field where it's very hard to include very clear which are the penalties for what.
Yeah. Vice President, it's part of your portfolio. So if I'm not mistaken, you're responsible for strengthening democracy and transparency and upholding European values and rights, e.g., rule of law. How do you react?
Well, may I react on the financial question?
Sorry?
On the question on the budget.
No, the question about, whether there is a linkage between the two, obviously.
Yeah,
that is key.
I really want to react on this because it was my idea, by the way, to come with such a conditionality between the principle of rule of law and the EU budget, but not only cohesion money. It is proposed as a conditionality which relates to the whole budget, not only cohesion money to punish, as the Prime Minister said, some specific countries. So this is, when I came with this idea, it's I think 2017, it created a very intensive wave of protest.
Oh, yes.
And I expected this to be dropped over the budgetary negotiations, and it is still there. This increasing support because we all see that the rule of law issue is a problem which could create big problem for the whole Europe. So I hope this will be adopted, but again, not only cohesion money. The second thing, financial pressure cannot be the only measure we use to protect the rule of law in the EU. It's absolutely clear. And the third thing, it must be precise. The proposal is very precise. It contains the list of the situations which might trigger this conditionality. So no vague phrase which might be used against everybody. And the last comment, we really tried hard to create the mechanism which in the end will not punish the municipalities, the NGOs, the project applicants. So this is on the money. On the rule of law itself, well, indeed, we have to work more intensive in different, through different strands of work. One is the legal approach. Article 7, which I never believed will ever be triggered, but it is there. We have this procedure already in case of Poland and Hungary. We have to open again the technical level dialogue with Poland, also with Hungary, to discuss the things in more depth. I was in Warsaw recently. There was I had a very good debate with the Minister of Justice, and he explained to me why they started the reform. What were the problems in Polish judiciary? Including the heritage of communism. And as a person from Czech Republic, I have understanding for that. And I explained why this is EU matter, why EU has something to say to it. And we have to open this technical debate to explain to each other where there is the line between the reform of judiciary, which we want to see in the member states to have judiciary system more efficient, more better working for the people, and where is the line of breaching the independence of judiciary, which we see in Poland. The third strand of work will be the annual review on rule of law, which we will come with in September or October this year. And we will cover all the member states. This is something which Poland, Hungary, maybe Romania call for a long time. Look at all the states. Don't focus only on, sorry to say it, but usual suspects. And we will cover the constitutional balances of powers, which Madame Čaputová spoke so well about before here, that this is a very key principle. We will look into independence and efficiency of judiciary. We will cover the anti-corruption measures in each country, and we will also cover the independence of media and media pluralism and freedom of speech. So looking at all four components in all the member states will give us better picture on where we are in Europe with rule of law. Sorry, I was too long.
That's fine. It's your area. Annalena Baerbock, Minister President Laschet, Vice President Skinas, quickly, conditionality, yes or no?
Yes, but if I may, because I think the details are very important in politics. Yeah? If you have only headlines and everybody agrees, you do not move forward if you do not talk about the detail. So I'm very thankful to the Commissioner that she mentioned them, because I believe that there's not like common agreement anymore. So if you allow me, I would like to make 3 short remarks. First of all, almost all Democratic Party talked about in the European election campaigns about the rule of law. So we have to deliver. If we do not deliver on this point, the raised voting turnout will go down in the next step. So we do need this mechanism. Yes, we need it. I think it has to have teeth. So I totally support that it has to be connected in the proposal of the Commissioner to a financial question. Going to one of the details, for me it's essential that you do not target communities. We have so many regions and communities who do the best for the rule of law, who keep up the freedom of press and all these kind of things. So you really have to target those who are responsible on the national level if there's breach. So this would be very important for me in this regard. And I really hope it stays, because what I saw now also in the MFF, the high connection towards the financial funds is not there anymore. So it's really up to all of us in the European Parliament and the Council to bring your original proposal back on the table. And third point, and there I would also follow up what you have said. We cannot only look at some countries, because then we never get the unanimity we need here. So looking at the breach in different fields, have the screening mechanism, not only by the Council, but with an independent commission, which was also proposed by the European Parliament. And this is very important for me, we have to look, in my point of view, at treaty infringement procedures. Because the rule of law is not only the biggest topics of freedom of speech. We have so many treaties. For example, in Germany, we breach more than 100 treaties of the European Union. We are with more than 100 cases in front of the European Court. So this is also a question of law if the big parties apply. So I totally agree. We have to draw a bigger picture, because otherwise we have the old division again of saying there are small states and there are big states, but it has to be the same for everybody.
Very good. Herr Ministerpräsident.
Also ich glaube, ja, wir brauchen Anreizsystem.
Yes, I do think we need incentives. And the last example you mentioned is one where that already happens. It's not something new in Europe. Whenever somebody refuses to play by the rules, they will have to pay penalties to the EU. That is something new in this area, but there should be this link. And there should be this link when it comes to solidarity in Europe with regard to refugees. We saw that when the distribution mechanism was agreed, you mentioned it, it didn't work. It just didn't work. A qualified majority is not sufficient in order to force a decision on a country that has a very different tradition that will be criticized by the country affected, and the mechanism will not work. But we can say this is a task that affects overall European solidarity. We must not leave the Mediterranean states in the lurch, like Greece, for example. And at the same time, those who refuse to take in refugees can be granted fewer funds or less funds than others that show solidarity. I think something like that should be included in the new rules. If you show solidarity, that will pay off when it comes to funds that you get from the European Union.
Question here. What you've just said puts you much closer to Emmanuel Macron than to Viktor Orban. Now, you belong to a political family of which Macron is not a member, but Viktor Orban is a member. Is that right?
You ask me?
Yeah.
The political families in Europe are very broad, you know. Ich war Mitglied des Europäischen Parlaments.
I used to be a member of the European Parliament, so I can tell you that it is quite possible for a Christian Democrat from another country to be closer to a Social Democrat from another country, and the other way around. So it is not such a strict division as in national politics. There are many things that link us with France. We Germans, there's a high degree of commonality, irrespective who is the French president at the time. Helmut Kohl and François Mitterrand set a lot of things in motion, and they came from very different political camps, political families. So this is what makes our Franco-German friendship stronger. So as commissioner for this task, I'm part of this Franco-German process after all. I am in charge of things that make the Franco-German friendship stronger. The Aachen Agreement is an example, but we must be open for others. And that, too, has always been our intention. France and Germany have always been stronger when they included smaller countries, when they opened up their activities towards a better Europe to other partners, to other countries. And whoever is prepared to go along is very welcome to join in.
The conditionality question, and then we continue.
On the rule of law, I think there was a temptation in certain quarters to think that there is one magic bullet that sorts everything out. So we lost a lot of time and energy around Article 7. And I think the right response in the area of rule of law is to create a rule of law ecosystem that forces the liberal tendencies, if you like, to see more incentives in the ecosystem rather than out of it. What will be in this ecosystem? First of all, infringements. That's where the Commission can be very helpful, tangible, and specific. We address everything that hits community law with the force of community law. And I think this is a track that is working. A second, of course, planet of this galaxy would be certainly the conditionality, but clever conditionality, not indiscriminate one. And the third, and equally important, is to answer back, to defend, to explain. I was a chief spokesman of the Commission for the last 5 years. I took hell from these quarters. I saw my name in billboards, in the dark internet, projected as the man of this, as the man of that. But at some point, we have to answer back, and we have to do it with the force of our arguments and the force of our values. And I think it's happening. I mean, I'm not entirely pessimistic on the way the rule of law debate develops, and my colleague Vera Jourova will be the one who will do the job now.
There's a Munich young leader who had a question that was sent electronically. That person is not in the room. I'll take your question first and then go back, please. Do you have a mic?
Thank you very much. Professor Katarzyna Pisarska, I'm the founder and director of the European Academy of Diplomacy in Warsaw, Poland. I wanted to ask you about yesterday's speech of Secretary Pompeo. He has mentioned that the US Congress has agreed for a $1 billion fund for the Free Seas Initiative that started between Poland and Croatia and now consists of all Central European countries. This is an initiative that concerns mainly building energy, but also other infrastructure. And it is the first time the United States has decided to commit. What is your impression on this American commitment? How do you see the Free Seas Initiative? Do you see it as a potential competition to what the European Union is doing or not? On the contrary, is there any fears regarding this specific development? Thank you.
Very good. We have a question in the back here. Please, over there.
It's okay? Go. Paolo Valentino, Corriere della Sera. I have a question for Minister President Laschet. I'm not going to ask you whether or not you'll run for the presidency of your party. But in your expose, you correctly described how Germany in the 80s provided leadership and proposals for the advancement of Europe. And then you said quite adamantly that Germany must deliver in terms of providing leadership and new proposals in the coming presidency of the European Union. Now, if I may say, this sounds like a criticism of Angela Merkel, who in the last 2 years remained basically silent in front of President Macron proposals. So is that correct as an impression? And second, why should be any different from July to December under the same chancellor from what has been the last 2 years, in which Germany basically didn't go along in pushing for more integration and more reform for Europe? Thank you.
There's a third question over there, and then we go back to the panel.
Thank you very much. Claudia Gamon, member of the European Parliament and the Munich Young Leader. I want to thank the moderator for bringing up the conference on the future of Europe because it has a lot of potential to solve many of the issues that have been raised on this panel. However, many speakers in the past 2 days have mentioned that they fear that European institutions are not up to the challenge to react in the speed that is necessary nowadays. And many people have raised issues that are due to just how the European Union works, how the institutions work, how the treaty works. Are you ready to talk about the potential of treaty change, and not in a very long future, but in a near future, and how much more time can we actually afford to take to start talking about the elephant in the room, which is a change of the treaties?
Wow, that's a menu. We start in the middle this time. Vice President Jourova, briefly, you pick your question, and then we go to the others.
So may I pick the last one?
Well, you pick what you want to pick.
Yes. I think that we showed that we can react very quickly. I am I wanted to say perpetrator. I am in criminal justice for a long time, but I am one of the co-authors of the Code of Conduct we came with in spring 2016. We needed immediate solution for rising hate speech online. And the agreement was very quick with the big tech companies. And it was under heavy criticism that what kind of solution and decision it is, but we needed to act to protect the people. But when it comes to legislation, I am quite grateful that the process is long enough to invite all the actors to have a say, because I don't think that for European legislation, which has the influence on big things, how the people live and what are the opportunities in the EU, I don't think that speed is a good advisor, and that speed is the good parameter for taking key decisions. The appetite to open the treaty, I am myself curious. If we do that, I have some very concrete proposals how to make Europe more and better to understand for the citizens. For instance, every month traveling to Strasbourg, it's something which should be considered.
Thank you. As the two prime ministers, perhaps in particular, to react on the question about the United States.
Me?
Yeah, sorry.
The initiative 3Cs was an important initiative regarding developing on the eastern flank of projects of infrastructure on transport, energy, and other kind of project. At the reunion organized in Bucharest, participated not only the American representative, but also, I remember, the President of European Commission, the representative of Germany. Is an initiative inside Europe. I saluted the statement of State Secretary regarding the involvement with $1 billion in this project. But of course, the countries which are part of initiative should participate, and we should realize a mechanism to use all these resources collected from the contribution of different states involved in this project and the United States. I think also that the European Union could participate to support some of the expenses.
Prime Minister Plenković.
On 2 points, very positive commitment. I think 3C's initiative can help, and it's good to have the United States committed. On the question which was also raised, and that is the issue of the treaty change in the Conference on the Future of Europe. You know that the Croatian presidency has been mandated to unite the common position of the Council, and we are in the nitty-gritty final negotiations with the member states. This is one of the key issues. I think we should be smart enough and leave that possibility open and then see, because the treaty change is not the only elephant in the room. The biggest elephant in the room in the last political European year was how did we understand what do we imply by the Spitzencandidate and the ramifications of the results of the European elections. That should be something that is definitely part of the agenda of the conference to be clearly addressed, because in 2024, if we stay as we are now, I wonder who will have the courage to be the Spitzencandidate of any of the groups.
Annalena Baerbock. I go to you last, Prime Minister. Annalena Baerbock, Margit Sinas.
Well, to the question, I agree what was said before. I think we need a two-track approach in this regard. I mean, 2 days we discussed on this conference. Now we need common European security and foreign policy. Obviously, this cannot work in unanimity. So in this field, we do have to do something, and I think we also have to talk about treaty changes. But, and this is a bit but from my side, I see that many hide between the treaty changes because everybody knows this won't start tomorrow. So I think the important thing also at the summit is not to say we cannot do anything by now, but we have to remember that we have many tools, you mentioned it, within the European treaties by themselves, enhanced cooperation, all the big integration projects like Schengen, like the Euro, they were done by this form of enhanced cooperation, and there are still some on the table from the French president, like investment into a Eurozone budget, also the question of common taxation, which has unanimity, which we should change. But as long as we don't do it, nobody hinders us from cooperation of having a common European digital tax, for example. And unluckily, my country is in these kind of fields not in the forefront. And my big danger is if we forget about this cooperation, which is possible, this goes to the first question, then something else happens. Others step in. And I can totally understand that those countries concerned, they are happy that there is investment from the US. But actually, I'm a bit afraid, and I think this should have been European investment from the EIB or via a Green New Deal, and that's why the budget is so important. We saw it in Greece. Because Europe didn't invest via a Eurozone budget, then the Chinese came into critical infrastructure. We have to be very carefully right now in Europe that in sensitive elements of our infrastructure, there is not so much foreign investment that the whole question about sovereignty is not there anymore, because inside Europe we opened many gates, and so I think this has to be actually a European point under the umbrella of the Green Deal, under the umbrella of the new budget of the European Union.
Margit Skinas, and then we turn to Armin Laschet.
On the Three Seas Initiative, I think we should welcome the American interest. Three Seas Initiative is a European initiative. All these countries are part of our European transport and energy trans-European networks, so we have already an architecture which is European, and $1 billion is very much welcome. Simply to remind everybody that the European Union, through our cohesion and structural funds, spends about 50 billion in this area. Now, on the Conference of the Future of Europe, there is one risk that I was discussing with Elmar Brok and others yesterday, that the risk is that this conference is understood as something that means Brussels talks to Brussels. That would be wrong. Equally wrong would be who governs this. So in European politics for 30 years, no one ever discussed normal people, interinstitutional relations with me. Nobody really cares. Nobody cares. People care about issues. So if we trigger this process and it becomes a mechanics of experts and geeks, that won't work. And the treaty change debate, I think the reply is very simple here, that form should always follow function. I mean, if out of this we get something that needs to be reflected in a form, we'll do it. If not, we should not start with an objective of doing it without knowing what we want to go.
Herr Ministerpräsident.
Ja, das war ja eine schwierige Frage.
Well, that was a complicated question that was raised by the colleague of the Corriere della Sera, whether I was criticizing the federal chancellor. Well, I would have liked to see a more committed response to Macron and more discourse, because I do agree with his approach in his election campaign. When you have strong populists in your country and when there's the danger of Marine Le Pen winning the elections, then I think it makes sense to make a specifically European campaign. I won't avoid that topic. but I will do the exact opposite. And this is how he was successful in winning the elections in 2017. He then gave a speech at the Sorbonne with very substantial and important proposals for Europe, and he could have expected a committed and clear German response. The Aachen Treaty was part of the response because we specified closer German-French cooperation. I don't share his view on the institutional issues regarding the budget of the Eurozone because that he has a very intergovernmental approach, as France usually does. But of course, this budget has to be closely linked to the budget of the European institutions. But you can manage consensus on such issues. However, with a view to the German government, I would like to say that these past years have been marked by huge crises. We had a financial crisis, a crisis of debt, a crisis of migration, a conflict between Russia and Ukraine, where Germany and France took an important mediator role. Then Brexit. So maybe it was not the time for a large-scale vision of Europe. I believe the time ahead now will require such a vision. And once you define what you want, then you can maybe think about changing the treaties. And if necessary, you need to have that discussion. We know that it is hard, but if you want to make structural reforms and you see that you need changes, then you must not shy away from changes to the treaties.
All round, you have one word, maximum one sentence. Now, Marcel Proust wrote one sentence with 865 words. If you're capable of this, be my guest. And it's really perhaps very simple for you, Prime Minister. Schengen or the Eurozone? What's first?
Both.
I have the same question for you. What's first, Schengen or the Eurozone?
First Schengen and after Eurozone.
Very good. That's clarity. Widening or deepening? For you, Vice President. Widening, enlargement, or deepening of the European?
Of course, enlargement.
Okay.
Widening. Of course.
Very good. Annalena Baerbock. Opposition or government?
Eternal
Responsibility in both cases.
Simple one. And I ask it in German, but you will understand it.
Düsseldorf or Berlin? Aachen.
Charlemagne.
Last one is open or closed?
Open, but aware.
Ladies and gentlemen, let me thank you and let me thank the panel. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you.